It is the nightly custom of every good mother, after her children are asleep, to rummage in their minds and put things straight. Black shadows moved about in them. The roar of the beasts of prey was quite different now. Above all,
does anyone read me?
You want to see a magic trick?
Yeah. Your lives were short and filled with fear. Then your brains grew. You built tools, used them to conquer nature, went to space. You stopped being food. Or, I should say, you told yourself you weren't food anymore.
Listen back up. My mind.
But in the animal kingdom, there's always someone bigger or smaller who would eat you alive if they had the chance. That's what it is to be an animal.
There's another creature. She's approximately 8 feet tall. Armored.
You're born, you live, you die.
you lost the certainty that you would win.
Hello Xenofans, fellow Mudbeards, and anyone else who's wondering when my wardrobe will match the same quality of my intros. It won't ever do that. Anyways, today I wanted to discuss some of my thoughts on the premiere of Alien Earth, primarily for those who've already watched the first 2 episodes. But if you haven't watched the first 2 episodes, I will provide a soft little recommendation and spoiler light review. The show essentially follows what goes down on Earth while all the crazy events of the Alien franchise are going on in space. Led by the creator of series like Legion and my personal favorite Fargo, Noah Hawley has some experience in creating really in-depth characters and really interesting character plots. And you can definitely see a lot of his flavor and cinematography implemented within this show. But that's not to say there isn't an obvious love and passion for what he's representing. When it comes to the set design or practical effects, with some solid sound design and some stellar music, primarily helmed by Jeff Russo, or even just some of the homages to the original franchise, it really helps immerse the audience into the fact that this is taking place within the same universe as the rest of the Alien series. You're in for at least an entertaining experience if you watch this series. The primary threats all these people have to deal with? Well, different variants of humankind, different corporations vying for power in a corporate war, and several aliens besides just the xenomorph. So much so that I actually started to consider if we'd mainly get the other aliens throughout the story and maybe just see the xenomorph at the beginning and at the very climax. But rest assured, if you are interested or a fan, the xenomorph seems to be a pretty present part of the narrative. But I'm officially deeming all this conflict going down on Earth the Alien Corporation Crucible, because it's just straight up chaos. Either way, I'll touch on some of the augmented beings I referenced earlier. You have synthetics, which are complete androids programmed and modeled by whatever corporation made them. You have cyborgs, which are humans who use sci-fi technology to augment their bodies. And then you have hybrids, or LBs / Lost Boys. These are essentially synthetics with a human consciousness implemented within them. You can tell that the creators of this show are fans of the franchise going into it, with these first 2 episodes feeling like a blend of both Alien 1 and Aliens. Let's go ahead and start with some of the storylines we get developed on Earth. We follow a sick girl who's about to be the first consciousness transferred over to a synthetic body. Seemingly so. We're introduced to other characters that are a part of the same corporation in the Prodigy Corporation that also give off a very similar vibe to someone who isn't fully human, that being Timothy Oliphant's character. But we don't have enough to go off of with him just yet to really theorize. Either way, it's safe to say, like with the Genetic Dynasty in the Foundation show, having this actor be a synthetic would actually help keep him around for any time jumps, which are likely going to happen throughout the series, or at least in between seasons. Either way, the Prodigy Corporation is run by someone who's known as the Boy Genius, an extremely intelligent and rich individual whose primary goal is to establish himself himself to the point where he can have a conversation with someone who he deems equal to himself. So yes, obviously a very humble person with a very good heart, like every trillionaire. An interesting thing to note, one of the first interactions we get with Timothy Olyphant's character and the primary protagonist in Wendy is when she's sick and they're looking at the scorpion trapped in the glass. This could very easily be seen as subtle foreshadowing for where the potential story will go involving the xenomorph and her inclination to protect those she loves. While they're wandering around this facility, there is a shot of some weird stuff being sprayed off of the walls. The boy genius is running an endeavor known as the Neverland Project. This project will essentially result in humanity living long term and being capable of enduring any of the harshness space will provide. The reason it's called Project Neverland is because it's very inspired by the series of Peter Pan. And if it is the inspiration for the series, even in some of the characters' namesakes, you could consider the boy genius Peter Pan himself, wanting everyone to stay young forever like him. Speaking of which, I don't think he's actually synthetic, though that could be a cool twist to realize later on. Maybe him being an older trillionaire beforehand and transferring his consciousness into a younger one, but that's up for debate. If that's the case, then you could potentially see Timothy Olyphant's character as Captain Hook. But let's go through some of the other Lost Boys, or who I'll keep referring to as LBs from now on, and their characters. You have Slightly, who honestly appears as a very funny character who potentially can be utilized very well throughout the story for some very necessary relief.
Question?
I want to
Subscribe to MudLuvMedia.
when I grow up.
Okay. That's not a question.
Then you have Curly, who, if you've ever watched the show The Wilds, or Yellow Jackets fans may know as the Amazon version of Yellow Jackets, their name being Arana James, and our primary protagonist in Wendy, the very first hybrid. Now, the primary reason LBs have to be children rather than any adults getting their consciousness transferred over is because supposedly an adult brain is a little too stiff, which makes you wonder about Timothy Olyphant's character. Either way, it's very vital for all the LBs to keep this stuff a secret, potentially because it's inhumane, but most likely because it's illegal to do whatever he's actually doing here. And while he did show a little more nurturing to them than I actually thought he would, it's obvious the boy genius sees them as a means to an end. With the fact that they could be potentially tracking them with their capabilities of finding Wendy on the side of a cliff, or with their nightly routine with manipulating their minds while they sleep. It's obvious he's starting to forget about the human aspect of these people he's dealing with. And there's several moments throughout the show where he has to be reminded of such. Either way, Wendy is a very unique case when it comes to the LBs because she's supposedly special, seen as special before she even had her consciousness transferred over. And post the procedure, it seems that she is more capable of certain things than any of the other characters. Right now, that primarily remains in her capabilities of hearing at higher decibels, but we could see more as the series goes on. She's someone who's very capable of being responsible for the rest of the LBs, likely in finding inspiration from her older brother Hermit. Her older brother Hermit is someone she deeply cares about, someone who had no idea she was even still alive. See, while she was on this island getting treatment and eventually going under this procedure for the Neverland Project, he was living a very, very humble life and working as hard as he could with no chance of resignation, even when it came to the fake news of the death of his sister. Hermit is played by a very talented actor named Alex Lawther, who you may have seen in Black Mirror's most popular episode, or in the sci-fi series Andor. He's shown to be a kind soul, and perhaps that kindness is actually paying off because throughout the series, he also tends to be one of the luckiest human beings alive. Why do I say this? Well, because with the amount of people that actually ended up dying in these first two episodes, he barely made it out of most situations by the skin of his teeth. And while there was a reasonable narrative for every single time he did make it out, there was one questionable moment with this character that I'll get into more towards the end of the video. But let's go ahead and break down why there's even a story to be told in the first place, and that's with the aliens. See, a research vessel was sent out into deep space and had collected several different variants of some of the most dangerous aliens you could imagine. And with the crew alluding to the amount of people that potentially died getting these creatures on board their ship, you have to wonder if at any point capturing any one of these aliens, someone suggested maybe they just turn around and go home. Because if I saw a few of my friends die some of the ways these aliens can kill you, I'd wonder what the purpose of even bringing these things back were for. And if some guy with glasses wants to come up and tell me it's for research, well, I'll punch him in the face and throw his glasses right off. Either way, this vessel was primarily sent by the Weyland-Yutani Corporation. Something to keep in mind is Weyland-Yutani wasn't always Weyland-Yutani, originally starting as Weyland, with the founder eventually meeting his fate in the Prometheus movies. You then had their indoctrination into the Yutani Corporation, and I believe this series is taking place relatively soon after the formation of Weyland-Yutani, so there could still be some corporate tension there. But this ship, despite however many people must have died, made its way around deep space and relatively close back to Earth. With seemingly everything under control, they had a pretty straight shot. But unfortunately, potentially there was an outbreak and the aliens took them all down. But if you were paying a little more attention, you could easily piece together that this was very much sabotage. If it wasn't sabotage by the most questionable crew member being the cyborg Merle, who doesn't seem to have much care for human life, let alone the life of his crewmates, we still don't know for sure who exactly is responsible for it. But odds are Merle is definitely a top tier culprit. See, in the very opening of the show, which I will give props, very good at kind of recreating the very first Alien vibe, we get some reference in the dialogue to how the comms went down and the logs for them were corrupted, with one of the crewmates deeming that this could potentially just be a glitch and they'll check it out, and Merle insisting that they go ahead and wait for security. But part of me does also wonder if there was potentially some corporate espionage going on. See, unless I missed something, which is very possible, the boy genius could potentially have known what they were doing out there on that Weyland-Yutani ship. Heck, it's possible he even knows what xenomorphs are in the first place, or at least a very vague idea. But why do I say this? Well, primarily for a very tinfoily reason that is likely incorrect, but what I would argue is a shot that you can actually see the sketch or drawing, or even cave painting, of a leaping predator or yautja. And yes, I probably mispronounced that. Couple this with some of the scenes where his eyes light up knowing that the ship has crashed and he gets what's on board, and even referencing that he wants what's on that ship, you could accumulate this to him just being a normal corporate CEO who just wants to take another CEO's toys and is more than happy to screw a rival over. Or you could potentially attribute this to the fact that he has some knowledge of some of the Xenos out there in the universe. And if him having a cave painting of a predator seems pretty far-fetched, I'll remind you that almost all the entire franchise started because of cave paintings. See, in Prometheus, the entire reason Elizabeth Shaw and her husband teamed up with the Weyland-Yutani Corporation, or at this time it was just the Weyland Corporation, was because of cave paintings left behind by the engineers. The engineers are the space jockeys of the Alien franchise. For anyone who doesn't know or doesn't quite remember, in the first Alien movie, they landed on the planet LV2. I'll just audio that in. And they ended up coming across the space jockey and all of the facehugger eggs, which led to the events of the Alien franchise. Either way, cutting back to Alien Earth, it does seem like sabotage did take down this ship, as you can even see a dead facehugger before any facehuggers got the chance to be released, and with several dead bodies still remaining within cryosleep, and with supposedly the one primary researcher tripping out while she was studying her pets. It's even possible all of this started because of an accident. Either way, the ship eventually lands on Earth directly in Prodigy City, which is owned by the boy genius. And they make it a keynote to point out that it was Founders Day, so a good chunk of the population was out. But I will say there was still a good chunk of the population that got decimated by this crash. And I also appreciate the budget that went into creating this crash in the very first place. Very interesting shots that I'll be very excited to edit here soon. Once they land in this city, Hermit and the rest of his team under Prodigy's wing are sent in as search and rescue to help everybody affected. And when Wendy gets word of this, she immediately vouches for the rest of the LBs to head on in there and help as well, with the boy genius being ecstatic at the idea of pushing these new hybrid models and seeing what they could potentially do. And one thing I like about premiere episodes in a series where a lot of characters will tend to die is that you can give equal development to any character in these opening episodes, and everyone's sort of on equal footing. As you could argue, some of the search and rescue officers actually got more development than even some of the LBs. And that's obviously because we're gonna probably get more of that as the series goes on. But that's just a solid way to utilize your narrative and your characters. Give us some appreciation for the characters you're about to kill right away so they don't just seem like red shirts. Because as the series goes on, it will become very easy to point out who is a red shirt and who is not. So we're in the very golden age of any slasher series where you really don't know who's gonna die. And a key thing I want to note on that, one reason I really like the Alien franchise is because it is sort of the original slasher series. And no, I don't just mean a series where a whole bunch of people got axed and chopped up, but I mean before the first Wars alien movie, the only real concept of any character dying at any moment and not knowing who the primary survivor or main character actually is was in Murder Mysteries. And when they approached the Alien film with the idea that they wanted to take different actors and characters and leave it questionable who will actually make it through to the end, well, in today's standards, it's become a very common staple in any horror movie. But I think a lot of that can be attributed to Alien. Either way, through some amazing shots and sequences of some really cool aliens we get, eventually we follow Hermit and Wendy as they reunite with each other, with Wendy wanting to keep it an utter secret that she's not actually Hermit's sister, this becoming the very primary point of tension throughout the story, and I genuinely assumed would be the primary point of tension throughout the entire season. But of course that didn't end up being the case, with it being immediately revealed in sort of an Attack on Titan twist reveal style that Wendy was actually Hermit's sister. So that mystery was delivered to us in a very unique way. And all in all, I think the entire premiere was solid. From the acting, to the music and sound design, to the practical effects and set design being absolutely stellar, and the cinematography being very engaging, I do think the dialogue was also solid enough, although there was some questionable moments. I think a highlight for me was not only every single xenomorph scene, and the ways they were actually shot and angled, but also the reveal of Wendy's sibling nature actually went down. My only real problem with this premiere was probably the very end, that being Hermit putting his face so close to a facehugger pod, despite it actually moving right in front of him, which is common in the Alien franchise and easily forgivable, and the xenomorph straight up tackling him right out of the building. See, Hermit is a character that will likely stick around through most of the season, but if they are going to keep him alive for most of the season, they're going to have to be very careful to avoid any plot armor. And I will say this isn't necessarily a good step in the right direction, as I've never seen a xenomorph dive tackle someone off of a building and it turn out well for anybody. But it also is a very common xenomorph trait that they do take their victims and keep them around for later. Maybe it was just the choreography that threw me off a little bit, but that was my real only complaint. Besides that, I was genuinely blown away by the entire episode, giving me that sort of nostalgia of watching both Alien and Aliens, and seeing both the tense scenes where characters are wondering where an alien is, or in the search and rescue response with all of the soldiers moving in and helping people out. It was just very cool to see. Theories for the future of the series? Well, I've been trying to avoid the trailers for the most part because sometimes studying trailers can give too much away, but there's a chance I'll have to dive back into the trailers for this series. All I know is, and potential spoiler alerts if you also avoid trailers, but that a xenomorph eventually makes its way to the island where the boy genius is. We know that in this grand corporation crucible, only one corporation really comes out on top. And honestly, with how prominent the Prodigy Corporation seems to be, it makes you wonder how they could ever lose their footing in this grand corporate war. Well, I think the clear answer to that is the xenomorph. But what did you guys think? Did you enjoy the premiere of the show? What are your theories for the future of the season? And were there any aspects you weren't necessarily a fan of? Either way, I want to hear about them. Keep it civil in the comments. Appreciate your feedback, appreciate your support, and remember,
There's a spaceship in the lobby.